Hello and welcome to RBtv episode 5. I'm your host, George Bonish. For those of you who've never tuned in before, RBtv is a video podcast covering some of the latest tips and tricks for the real basic development environment. Alright, so I thought we'd start off today's episode with a little bit of news. This episode is very long overdue. I know it's been a few months since I've filmed an episode, but I've been busy with work, and as you guys know, my last laptop, which I filmed all my episodes on, was stolen from my house. So I've been trying to work all that out and trying to get everything sorted out. But I should be filming every week and trying to get back on schedule now. So expect lots more episodes. Alright, so for today's episode, I've been getting a few emails, actually quite a few emails, about people wanting to add a sort of auto update feature to their programs or something, or some way for their programs to sort of phone home to check if they have the latest version, if their client's using the latest version of their software. So I figured that would be something good and simple that we can kind of start off on since we're back. So the code we're going to be writing today is going to be very versatile and in a matter that you can simply drop the code into any of your projects and get it running with little or no modifications to your actual program. So if you have Real Basic installed, let's go ahead and open it up and get started. Before we actually get started, you'll notice that now I'm using OS 10.5, Mac OS 10.5 Leopard, and Real Basic 2007 Release 4. So we're going to see how it works. From what I understand, there aren't that many bugs as far as Real Basic and the Leopard compatibility go, but I guess we'll all find out. So let's go ahead and open this up. Alright, so the first step is obviously to start a new project, and let's go ahead and save this. And I'm going to save this, actually, I have a special folder for this. We're going to save it in the RBtv directory here. We're going to call it episode 5. Hit save. Here, let's go ahead and add a class. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what a class is, it's sort of a grouping of code and objects that can be reused throughout your program or throughout any other program. So in this case, we're going to make an auto update class so that we can just simply export it and import it into any projects that we're going to need. So we're going to go ahead and rename this class. Come over here, we're going to name it C for class, and then auto update, and hit return to set that. And we're going to set the super right here to HTTP socket. So you can click in here and type HTTP socket. Now what the super does essentially makes this class inherit an object that Real Basic contains. So by setting this to HTTP socket, if I open up this class here, you'll notice that now we have all these methods, and all these methods are also available in the HTTP socket. So essentially this class now can be used as a socket, but we can sort of add our own functionality to the class so that we can make it sort of our own custom socket, which is exactly what we're going to be doing today. So the next step is going to be to create a window. Simply click this Add Window button here. We're going to name this W Auto Update. And again, W is for window, obviously. And we're going to make this window, if you come here to the frame property, you'll see we have about 10 or 12 options here. We're going to pick the sheet window option. Now what the frame property does is actually changes the look of the window. I can show you here. If we change this back to document, you notice that we get this top bar here, the title bar and the buttons. You can change it to movable modal, which removes the buttons. There's a lot of different options to play with here. You can actually kind of play around with this on your own time. There's lots of fun choices that you can pick, but for today's project we're going to click sheet window. Now the real benefits of it being a sheet window are only going to be evident in in an OS 10, a Mac OS 10 environment. So if you have Windows, it'll still work, but you're not really going to get the full effect of what a sheet window will do. But essentially, whenever you open a sheet window, you need to set it to have a parent. So you sort of associate the sheet window with another window, and what the sheet window will do is whenever you call it to open, it'll sort of slide out from the top of the other window. But that's again only OS 10 only, so if you have Windows, the window will just simply appear and close or whatever. So that's going to be fine, but for now let's go ahead and make the width of this window 400, and let's bring the size up right around, let's come over here, let's say 160. We'll probably change this a little bit later. I'm going to go ahead and save the project again, and we're going to create a few controls on the sheet window here. Come over here to the left control pane, and we're going to double click on progress bar. We're going to add a progress bar, and so what this window is right here that we're creating is going to be the window that tells us the progress of the update download. So essentially what our program is going to do, it's going to pull our server. So if you have a server that's going to host your downloads for you, we're going to be pulling a text file or an HTML file, and that file is going to contain a description of the update that's available, the version number, and a download URL. And our program is going to essentially read all that and parse it and download the update automatically for us, or when the user allows us to. So this progress bar in this window here is going to show us the details of the download as it progresses. So this progress bar here, let's go ahead and set it somewhere around the middle of the window and go ahead and drag it to the right so that it snaps to grid there. Then we're going to add a couple of static text objects. Just going to put one right up there. Go ahead and maximize this. And then we're going to put another one right below it, right about here. And then one more control is going to be the push button. This is going to be our cancel button. So if the user wants to cancel their download, they can go ahead and do that. And let's go ahead and bring this up just a little bit. Alright, so you don't need to worry too much about what all this is going to be doing right now. We're just sort of setting up our GUI for now. But let's go ahead and rename our controls so that we can kind of better understand when we begin coding. So go ahead and select our top static text object here, and come over to the name. We're going to name this ST title, and let's make this bold. And then let's go ahead and remove the text that's in there. Now, again, this text property here directly coincides with directly what's right here, so by removing this, we'll essentially remove what's printed right there. So you can delete that and press return to set it. And we're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to name this ST progress. And let's remove the text that's in there. And let's come to our button here, and we're going to name this BTN cancel. And our caption is going to state cancel. And finally, our progress bar, download. And set that. Okay, so we're looking good so far. So on the next step, we're actually going to be working on the server directly. We're going to be creating an HTML file that's going to contain this description of our update and the current version of our software. Now, if you don't have a server, you don't really need to worry too much about it. I'm going to leave all these files directly onto the RBtv server so that you can follow along with the project and go ahead and use those if you need to. But you can easily change the code so that it'll work with your own servers. So I have a couple of programs here, both made by Panic Software, which is a great company. They make great software. This is called Coda, and this is called Transmit. Now, Coda is just a simple HTML editor, kind of web editor, and Transmit is a FTP client. So we're going to be using the two. If you don't have these, you can use a text edit or whatever, and there's a few other FTP clients out there for the Mac. So I'm going to go ahead and come over here and log onto my web server. Now this is the main directory of my web server, and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it Auto Update. And inside this directory, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it index.html. So So that file got created. Now I'm going to edit this with Coda. I'm going to create a few things here. Now again, you can use TextEdit or whatever you're comfortable with. Just be sure if you're going to use TextEdit that you save it as a text file or as an HTML file, because by default TextEdit will save as an RTF, which is rich text, which includes a whole bunch of extra headers and stuff that really won't work the way we want it to. This is very similar to a previous project we had where we created a preferences file. We're going to be kind of using XML style formatting. So the first step we're going to do is type version here with open and closed brackets. I'm going to say 1.0.0, and again we're going to close this. The next step we're going to have is name. We're going to name this RBtv episode 5 project files, and we're going to have a description, the project files, and close that. Now you want to make sure when you're writing this that the syntax on your opening and closing tags here match correctly, because if you don't, the program really won't be able to read it correctly. And our final tag is going to be URL, which is going to contain our download URL for the update. So alright, so to kind of review over this, here's version tag, right? This is going to be the most current version. So our program is going to read this tag right here, compare it to itself, and if our program, our application, is lower than this value, then it's going to go ahead and display the update information. And name is going to be the name of the update available, obviously. Description is going to be a description of the update, and URL is going to be the path in a browser you know, on the web that's going to be directly to that download. And we haven't created this file yet, but we will eventually. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And the great thing about Coda is that it interfaces with Transmit. You can see here it automatically popped up that said upload complete, and so it automatically saves it directly onto our web directory there. So let's go ahead and create a new folder here. I'm going to say File, and in here is where we're going to house the current file or current update. So let's go ahead and switch back to Real Basic. Another feature of Leopard you'll notice was the spaces, how I can just kind of switch really quickly between my programs. Great feature. So now let's go ahead and come back over here to our CAutoUpdate class, and we're going to add a few properties. The first of which is going to be a string titled update version. And it's going to be a string, and we don't need to set that to anything. And we're going to have another one here. It's going to be update URL, and another one that's going to be update name, and finally update description. So the reason that we are creating these properties here in CAutoUpdate is that once we read the file from that index.html, or read the information from the index.html, we're going to want to set it into these properties so that we don't have to keep reading it whenever we need to access the information. We don't need to keep reading it from the web. We can simply store it into some properties and access it that way, which will be a lot easier. And finally, we're going to have one more property. We're going to call it save item, and this is going to be a folder item. Now we've briefly covered folder items in the past, and we're going to cover a little bit more today, so you'll get really familiar with that. And go ahead and save this just to be safe. Alright, so let me show you what, by creating this index file here, let me show you exactly what we did as far as on the web. So I'm going to open up Safari here, and I'm going to navigate to the directory. Alright, so it looks like a really long string in the web browser, but if you right click and go to View Source, you'll notice that you see the tags that we created. And now what an HTTP socket does, we haven't really covered sockets yet, but a socket essentially creates a network connection between another network client, or in this case a server. So essentially we're just creating a browser with no overhead. So we're going to be connecting to this URL here, and the socket's going to retrieve this data. It's going to pass the data back to our program as a string. And what we're going to be doing with that string is just simply parsing each one of these tags out and setting them to the appropriate properties. So now one final step before we actually start coding. Let's go ahead and access the menu bar 1 here. Now we've never covered menu bars yet, but it's a very simple idea. You can see here that this looks just like an OS 10 menu bar, and we can switch to the Windows menu bar or the Linux menu bar. But we're going to simply create a menu item that says check for updates. And it's really easy to do. You can click on whichever menu you want your menu item to be located in. In this case, we're going to click File. You come up here to this Add Menu Item button, and you'll see we have Untitled here. So you can simply click on that and come here to Text, and we're going to say check for updates. We're going to add an ellipses right there. Hit Return, and you see the name automatically gets changed to File, which is where it's located, and then check for updates. Now I'm going to want this to be above the quit menu item here, so I'm going to click quit, and you can just drag and reposition each one of these menu items just like that. So the next step is coming over here to window 1. Let's go ahead and rename this to wMain. Now I said we're not going to do a lot with this window, this main window here, and really this is the only change you'll have to make to your program in order to get this auto updating class to actually work with it. You're going to have to add this menu bar item here and simply integrate the menu bar to this window. Now you don't have to add the menu bar, that's just simply how I'm doing it. You could add a button, it could even happen in the background using the app class or whatever you prefer. But simply double click here on window main, and we're going to go ahead and add a menu handler. Now this is how you link the menu bar with an actual action or an event. So we can click Add Menu Handler, and if you click this drop down, you can see all our available menus, and you see here's the one we created, File, Check for Updates. So by clicking on that, we've renamed this this method here to File, Check for Updates. So now anything that we put in here will get called as soon as the user selects this menu item. So I can go ahead and show you guys a test now. So let's go ahead and do message box. We're going to say check for updates. I'm going to save this, and let's go ahead and run it just to do a test. So here's our program, and again you don't see that other window that we created, this window to be auto update, because it's never called. But if I come up here to File and Check for Updates, you see our message box, Check for Updates. So essentially what we're going to want to do is in the Check for Updates method here, we're going to want to initiate the process that's going to pull our server, download the data, parse the data, and all that. So let's go ahead and come back here to our CAutoUpdate class, and we're going to create a new method. And we're going to call this method update. And now update, we're going to have two parameters being passed. We're going to have a folder item, we're going to have a current window, or whatever window we want the sheet window to drop out onto. So we're going to have F as folder item, and we're going to have current window as window, and hit return to save that. So what this folder item is going to be is the location that we want the download to be saved to. Now the user is going to be able to select this, and it's going to be passed to this method to allow the socket to save the file. Now remember, this method is all contained within the CAutoUpdate class, which inherits the HTTP socket. So we have all this socket data available here. So any method that a socket contains, we can use. So the main functionality of a socket, the main method is the get method. And what the get method does, you pass it a URL, and it'll return the data that the URL contains. And if you pass it a folder item, it'll actually save the data to that folder item. So what we're going to want to do is me, and by saying me, we're referencing CAutoUpdate.get. I'm going to open the parentheses. we're going to say update URL, comma, and then F. So we're going to be retrieving the file at the update URL, and in this case it was, if you remember, this file right here, current.zip, which is located in the file directory. And then we're going to be saving it wherever the user passes, whichever directory the user selects. Now nothing's in update URL yet. We haven't written the function to actually retrieve the data yet, but we're just kind of preparing this method to download the file. And another catch to the whole folder item object is that we have to tell RealBasic exactly what type of folder item we're dealing with when it comes to zip files. It kind of gets a little bit tricky. If we don't specify that it's a zip file, it will actually save it as text as opposed to a zip file. It's just a few lines of code here. We're going to do f.mactype, and we're going to say equals, and open the parentheses, open the quotes, zip. Right below it, f.macCreator equals, and again, zip. So what this is telling RealBasic is that the file type we're downloading here, F, is of type zip and of creator zip. So essentially OS X will save it, or Windows will save it as a zip file. Let's go ahead and save this and create a new method. And this method we're going to call checkVersion and hit return. So this method, what we're going to be doing is actually polling the server, retrieving that index.html data and comparing it to the version of our own application. So for this example, I'm going to actually add a constant here. And what a constant does is basically it could be any sort of property that remains constant throughout the execution of the application. It actually can't be changed. For our occasion, we're going to actually be setting the app version, or the version of our current program. So what we're going to be saying is app version. Our default value is going to be 1.0.0, and we're going to set it of type string for now. And this dynamic button here you don't really need to worry about, and the platforms down here you can actually set each version individually depending on the operating system, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So once that's set, you can come back here to our checkVersion method, and let's go ahead and begin writing this. So we're going to need a few objects here within our checkVersion method. So let's go ahead and create those. We're going to dim version socket, which will be a new variable, as a new HTTP socket. So by saying new HTTP socket, we're creating the socket variable and actually instantiating it as a new object or new socket. And then below that, we're going to say dim data as string, and what data is going to contain is going to be the data that the HTTP socket returns. Or essentially what's going to be on the website or that HTML file. Now we're going to be creating something called a message dialog. And what a message dialog is a message box that instead of popping up in the operating system is actually going to slide out from the window if you have OS X. So we're going to do dim message dialog. That's just what I'm calling it, as new message dialog. Now you notice I put new up here when I'm actually creating the variable. There would be a few ways to do this. I could actually remove this new here, and then I would have to say message dialog equals new message dialog. But instead of doing that, I'm actually combining it all into one line, which actually saves a little bit of time and a few lines of code there. So we're going to have below this, message dialog also needs to have a few buttons. So we're going to have message button as new message dialog button. Remember, the tab button will allow me to select all the available options there. And then we're going to have one more, we're going to have a save dialog, and that's going to be where our user is going to select which or what directory that they want to save the update in. So we're going to say dialog save as new save as dialog. Now this may seem confusing right now, but in just a few moments you'll understand what each one of these is going to do. So now let's go ahead and retrieve the data off of our server for our update. To do that, we're going to simply use the get method of this HTTP socket again, But in this case, we're going to be actually using the value that it returns and setting it to data here. So what we're going to do is data equals version socket dot get, and here is where the URL of your own server will come in if you have one. But in our case, we're going to go ahead and use the RBtv server. So we're going to say http realbasic.tv/auto update. I'm not going to go ahead and put index.html. I don't have to do that, but it'd probably be a little bit better. And then now we're going to put a comma here, and the next value is going to be our timeout value. And what a timeout value does is it'll wait, if I put the number 5 here, it'll wait for 5 seconds. If the server, or if the program does not receive a response from the server after 5 seconds, the socket will just essentially die, and nothing will happen. If you don't actually set a timeout number here, this socket will just continue to pull the server, and your program will essentially lock up for a while. So let's go ahead and set it at 5 seconds. That's a pretty good number. So now we have data set to whatever version socket retrieved from index.html. So now that we have that data, it looks exactly like this. We're going to need to create a method or a function that's going to parse out each individual tag here, each individual key, and set it to the appropriate property. So let's go ahead and create a new method for that. We're going to call this parse key, and we're going to have it receive a few parameters here. The first is going to be key query as string, and the second is going to be data as string. So what key query will be is if we're looking for, let's say, the version number, we'll simply type version, and that'll be our key query. And data, which will be this big group of data here, this entire file, and this method will search the file for whatever our key query was and return the key as a string. So we can come here into our method. This is going to be a very short method, but very very powerful and robust method. So we're going to actually create two variables here. We're going to have a key start as a string, and we're going to set it here in the instantiation as we're going to open the brackets. We're going to basically format it just like our key is formatted here, or each one of these keys is formatted here. So we're going to have the open bracket there, and then we're going to say plus key query plus, and the closing there. Then we're going to have dim key end as a string again. In this case, we're going to have the closing parameter there, and key query, and then the closing bracket there. So whenever we pass key query as a string there, these two key start and key end are going to get formatted. So if we pass this function, let's say the string description as a key query, then it will format the start and the close tags for our file, for our data. And this is going to get a little bit tricky, but try to follow along. I'm going to try to go a little bit slow if I can. So what we're going to do is we're going to simply search the data for our key start and key end tags. So we're going to say return mid, and what mid allows us to do is returns a portion or length of a string, and what it requires us to pass is a source string, and in our case it'll be data, which is all that data that we read from the server. A starting integer, which is going to be the position of our starting cursor, and then an optional parameter is going to be a length, and basically that's how many characters you want to read from the string. The first parameter, let's go ahead and pass it data. I'm going to say comma. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. We're going to say for the next parameter we're going to use the inString function, and what the inString function is, returns the location within a string of the first instance of another string that you pass it. And that may seem confusing, but you'll understand in just a second. So we're going to say inString data, which is going to be the source string there. Then we're going to pass it key start. Alright, so we're going to have it look throughout the entire data string there. So right now our cursor is positioned at the beginning of key start within data here. A good way that I'm going to help you visualize this, I'm going to go ahead and copy this into Real Basic here. Just kind of show you exactly where our cursor would be. So we are at our mid here. We're dealing with data, which is this block of data here, this block of text. We're searching in string data. We're searching in this entire string here. This is all going to be one string. We're searching for key start. So let's say that our user passed the word description as key start, or as our key query here. So key start would get set to this, and then to this, and our key end would be get set to this, and closing brackets. Alright, so we're searching in string data for key start. So the first instance of this would be right here, right? So it counts out how many characters it had to go through to get there. So our cursor is placed right at the beginning of description here, at the beginning of this tag. So where we're going to want our cursor to be is actually right here, right at the end of description, because we're going to want to read just this section of text, or just this section of text. Wherever our tag, our first tag ends, we're going to want to read at the beginning of that. So in order to do that, we're going to say plus the length. LEN stands for the length, and what that does is that checks the length of a string of key start, and comma. So essentially what we just did, we positioned our cursor at the beginning of description, then we read, or at the beginning of this tag, then we read the length, or we figured out the length of this tag here, and we moved our cursor all the way to the end of that. So our cursor is positioned right here at the beginning of our actual description. So the next step is going to be another in-string call, and it's going to be pretty much similar to the other one. We're going to say data, comma, except we're going to use key end here. So again, remember the syntax of mid is going to be source string, beginning, cursor, and then the length that we want to read. So our cursor is here. Let's say this is like 30 characters in, right here. So now we positioned our cursor, or we positioned our length cursor here right at the end, because we searched data for this key end tag here, which would be right there. And now we're going to say minus, and it's going to get tricky again. Let's open parentheses. We're going to say in string data key start plus the length of key start. We're going to close out, make sure we close out all our parentheses here. Alright, that's a very tricky ending there. So let me kind of overview this with you. Essentially placed our start cursor here. So let's say this is 30 characters in, and our end cursor here. So let's say our end cursor is 50 characters in, right? And so we want to set our last parameter here in the mid function of how long, or what the length of characters is we want to read. You'll notice that this section right here is the exact same as the beginning here. So what we're doing is essentially saying we want to read 50 minus 30, which is equals 20. So let's say this was 20 characters, we'd want to read whatever's in between there, so our 20 characters in between there. It's kind of tricky. Go over it a few times, kind of write it out on a piece of paper. You'll really understand it. It's actually a pretty smart way to do it. Saves a lot of code. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all this. We're pretty much done with this function right now. Let's go ahead and save that. Take a break if you want. That was kind of an intense method to write. But now we're going to go ahead and get back to our check version method now, if you guys remember that. And we're going to say update version. Here's where we're actually going to set our parameters. It's going to be parse key. Now here's where it comes in handy. We're going to say version, comment, and pass it data. So our parse key function here returns a string. We're setting this update version string right here to whatever's contained under version in that data that we read from the website or from the server. If app version, which is this right here, it's our constant 1.0.0, is less than update version. Now here's the great thing about Real Basic is that we can actually do a value comparison of two strings. It'll automatically do that for us and return the Boolean value of whatever that is. So we're going to say then, and then here's where we're going to set all our variables. Now you're going to wonder, why are we setting this within this if statement and not right here? Well, there's no point in setting all this data if our program doesn't need to be updated, right? So there's no point in even wasting the processes. So we're going to say update URL is equal to parse key URL, pass it data, and we're going to say update name is equal to parse key name, and update description is equals to parse key description. So you can see how that method really came in handy with all of this. Otherwise we would have had to put that code in here, 5 or 6 times, however many things we needed. Now keep in mind that you're not limited to these variables or these properties. You don't even have to have a name and a description and all that. You can just have URL and a version and pop up a dialog to say there's a new version available. I just do this because it's an extreme situation. It kind of gives you a broad range of update kind of options, I guess. So now we're going to go ahead and use this message dialog and save dialog. So let's go ahead and add a comment here. It's going to say show dialog within a window. And there's a few properties that we can set for a message dialog, and I'll show you those here in this pop-up. We have action button, cancel button, explanation icon, message, all that. For our case here, we're going to go ahead and select icon, and what icon does is chooses the icon that's displayed. There's a large icon that's displayed, whether it be a caution icon or a stop sign icon or the actually icon of the application. And in our case, we're going to use icon number 2. It requires actually a value, a number value, an integer. And in the language reference is actually a list of all the values available. So you can go ahead and look at that if you want. And we're going to say message dialog dot action button dot caption. Now what the action button is the main button of this message dialog. So in our case, it's going to be the yes, I want to update button, or the OK button. Let's go ahead and update. So we're going to say the caption equals update now. And what the caption is just essentially what the button will say. Now let's say message dialog dot cancel button, and we're going to want a cancel button so that we're going to alert the user that an update's available. They have the choice to either update now or don't update. But in order to display it, we're going to have to set it to be visible, and that's going to take a Boolean value. And then we're going to say message dialog again dot cancel button dot caption. We're going to set the caption on this one equal cancel. Alright, so we've created our message dialog box here. And now we just need to create the message that's contained within the dialog box. So essentially what it's going to be displaying. So let's go ahead and say message dialog dot message equals, and it's going to be taking a string, available update. Message dialog takes one more property. It's called an explanation property, and that's more of like a detailed description of whatever you want the dialog to state. So we're going to have explanation equals, and here's where we kind of get to be creative with our properties. And we're going to say equals update name plus, we're going to add an end of line here, so we're going to kind of drop down one line, plus, then we're going to say version, add a colon there, plus update version. Let's add another couple end of lines here. What an end of line is essentially hitting the return key or the enter key. It's just dropping down our text one more line. And then we could say plus update description. This is just my own formatting. You can do this however you want. You can see the result. I kind of played around with this a little bit, and I thought this looked pretty clean. So now finally we have our message button, which is going to be that dialog button. We're going to say equals message dialog. Now here's where we're going to actually be displaying this dialog within our window. So this is where we're going to make it slide out from the top of the window. And there's a really neat function. It's called show modal. So now you have modal. Now this, if I were to just set it as show modal like that, the window would simply pop up. But we're going to say show modal within, and then we're going to have it be current window. So show modal within is going to need to be past a window that tells it which window it needs to be displayed with, and we're going to say current window. We don't have current window yet, but we're going to go up here to our parameters list, simply create current window as window, and hit return to set that. And let's go ahead and save our changes now. Alright, so we've kind of finished the first step within this method. This is going to be our biggest method in today's project. So we're going to go ahead and create a case statement here, and what a case does is it'll execute a certain statement out of a group of statements depending on the result of a certain value that it's passed or that's returned. And now keep in mind that we're still within this if statement here, so this is all getting executed only if our version of the program here is less than what's on the server. So we're going to go ahead and say select case message button, and by saying message button we're essentially setting our case determinant to whatever this message button here, if it's pressed or not. So if the user actually selected the update now button, we're going to go ahead and say display save dialog. And we can say dialog save dot initial directory. Now what initial directory is essentially whenever the save dialog is displayed, what directory is displayed first. And so we're going to say is equal to the desktop folder. Desktop folder, it's a special folder within Real Basic that will automatically navigate to the desktop folder depending on whatever operating system it is. So if you have Windows, it'll go to the document settings folder and the current user and all that. And if you have a Mac, it'll go to the home or the users directory, to the current user, and so forth. So that's actually a handy feature. And then we're going to say dialog save dot prompt text, and what prompt text is going to be the text that's displayed is going to kind of tell the user what they need to save or what they're going to be doing. So we're going to say select the save location, and another one we're going to be saying dialog save. The next property that we need to set is going to be dialog save dot suggested file name. And here's where you can kind of get a little bit creative. I'm just going to go ahead and put current.zip because that's what I know the file is going to be called. But you can actually, figure out a special way to name your program depending on whatever your application is called. But this is just going to be what the file that they download is going to be saved as on their hard drive. And finally, we're going to have a save item here, which is this folder item right here, equals dialog save dot. We're going to have another show modal within and current window. So essentially what we're saying is display another modal window, but this time it's going to be a save as window instead of this message window here within the current window. And if the user saves the file, we're setting the folder item properties to our save item folder item right there. So go ahead and skip a few lines now. So we can say if save item is greater than or equal to nil, then, and what this says is that if the user actually did save the file and didn't hit the cancel button, we can say update file. We're going to have else user canceled. In that case, we're not really going to need to do anything. We can simply end if. So we can come here. This is where our update method is going to come into play. We can say update, and we're going to need to pass it. If you remember what update required, it requires a folder item and a window. So we're going to say save item, comma, current window. So if the user clicked save, we have all the necessary information. We have our URL and all our properties here. We have the current window that we're going to need to display the dialog out of, or the progress window, this one right here, this W auto update. And we have the folder item that we need to save it to already created, and so we can go ahead with the download. So now we need to have one more case item here that says it's going to be message dialog dot cancel button. So here we have, actually we need to create the case here. I didn't even realize that. We need to say case message dialog dot action button. So what this is saying is that if the user actually pressed the action button, this will get called, and this is going to say if the user clicked the cancel button, remember we made those two, the action button here and the cancel button here, then this is going to actually get called. So we have these two are going to actually be separated from each other, and so we don't actually need to do anything on this. We can just simply write cancel button pressed. You can go ahead and do whatever you want in this, but on today's example we're not going to do anything. And in order to close out the select case here, we're going to do an end select, and then we're still within this if statement here, so we can say else version was not bigger. And let's go ahead and end this if statement there. So if you kind of come back here, let me see if I can bring this up. We have our if statement start here. If our app was of a lesser version than the one located on the server, we run this code, we do the whole select case block here, and then this is where our else comes in for this main if statement. Our version was not bigger, so we really don't need to display anything. We can just let the program execute as it was, and then we're going to go ahead and close that out. Let's go ahead and save this. That was actually a lot to write for one method, but go over that a few times, kind of review what we did and try and understand it. It's not too difficult, but we do call a few functions here, a few methods here within it, so go ahead and review that. Alright, so the next step we're going to need to do, let's go ahead and come over here to the W auto update window. We're going to need to create an associating method, and what an associating method is that since this is a class, the C auto update here, it's not really a created object, it's just sort of a template for an object that we can create within the code. So we're going to need to create a few items here within the window to be able to associate it with this class. Let's go ahead and create a method. I'm going to go ahead and say associate, and we're going to have it pass download as a C auto update, and then let's go ahead and create a property here. We're going to call it updater as a C auto update, and hit return to set that. So let's come here to associate, and let's say updater equals download. Alright, so what this is doing is that whenever we actually begin to download the file, in order to access the information within that class or within that object, we need to reference it to a local object. So in our case, we're setting if download was our currently active C auto update process, we're simply using updater to reference the data within download. So with updater, we can now access update, description, name, URL, and version, and that will be all the data that's relevant to the currently active download. And so you might not understand that right now, but you'll see what I'm talking about in just a few seconds. Let's go ahead and save this and continue on. Let's come over here back to our C auto update class. Now we're going to actually get into the socket methods here. There's a few here, but you don't really need to worry about them all. You can look in the language reference and see exactly what all of them do. Authentication required is, if a site would need a login and a password to be accessed, you could use that. But we're not going to need any of that for today's project. Now what we are going to focus on right now is going to be the receive progress method or event, and what that's going to be doing is essentially, if you use any sort of browser, you're familiar with whenever you're downloading a file, it'll show you the progress of that file download using a progress bar. And the way that works is that it reads the amounts of bytes received from the total bytes of the file. So essentially the file size, let's say you had a 1 megabyte file, then this would be displayed as 1 megabyte, and then our byte received would be however much of the file you've actually downloaded so far. So we're going to need to use this to actually interface with all the objects in here, or actually just our progress bar object in here. So the first step would be to call wautoupdate.pbdownload, which is our progress bar, and we're going to set the maximum property. What the maximum property is essentially the total size of our file that's going to be downloaded, and we can just say equals total bytes, and then we're going to say wautoupdate.pbdownload.value, and value is going to be the current value of the progress. So we have the progress bar, but it'll be the actual progress that's going along the bar. We're going to say bytes received. So is equal to bytes received, I'm sorry. So now we have set the maximum value, and as we're downloading, this receive progress event gets called the entire duration of the download. So essentially the whole time we're downloading, this code is going to be getting called and getting updated. So now we have the progress bar going through, but I figured we can go ahead and show the user a little bit more information. That's why we created this stProgress static text object. And what we're going to display here is going to say 0.5 megabytes of 1 megabyte downloaded, or however big our file is going to show us the exact data about the file download. So let's go ahead and come back here to the receive progress event. We're going to say wautoupdate.stProgress.text is equal to, so a few of you have asked to show you some math functions and some rounding functions. So here we're gonna do a few of those. So we're going to want to type bytes received, which is going to be however much we've received so far. We want to divide it by, now according to a few sources, it really depends on how big 1 megabyte is, but general consensus is this number here. It's going to be 1048576. So this is how many bytes 1 megabyte is. So by dividing these two, or by dividing bytes received by this number, we will receive a pretty long number as far as decimal places go. So we could have 1.8765431 megabytes. So we're going to want to actually concatenate this down to just 2 decimal points. So in order to do that, we're going to do, let's go ahead and put these into parentheses. And we're going to say times 100, and go ahead and put these into parentheses as well. And you got to remember that Real Basic follows the order of operations rule. So by putting things into parentheses, it'll go ahead and execute those in the order that they follow. And then we're going to take this whole value here and divide it by 100. And then close these off. And we're going to go ahead and convert this value to a string. So what this is doing is taking that decimal place, multiplying it by 100, and then dividing that by 100. And then we're going to say round right in here. And what that's going to do is going to round this whole value to the nearest integer value. Again, this math may be confusing, but take a calculator out and kind of do the math here, and you can see exactly how this works. So now we're going to say plus MB of, so MB stands for megabytes obviously. Then we're going to say plus, and we're going to do the same line of code here. We're going to copy this, but instead of bytes received, we're going to say total bytes. So again, we're taking that long string of bytes here, or that long integer there, and we're converting it to a easy value. And then we're going to say plus megabytes. Alright, so this getting called is going to update this string here with our current value. Let's go ahead and actually take this and reduce the size of it. Let's say we're going to make it size 10 for now. We can go ahead and save this. And let's go ahead and come here to the error method. Now we want to do a little bit of error handling in case the file doesn't exist, or you know, there's a problem with the server. So what we can do is say, if there, now this won't get called unless there is an error. So we can simply say wautoupdate dot st title dot text equals error plus code. Now code is the error code that was received, and if you look in the language reference, there's a whole list of the socket, HTTP socket code list. And we're going to say plus, we're going to say there was an error. We can close that off. Oh, and code is an integer, so we're going to go ahead and need to put string around that so that displays the code is a string instead of an integer, because we can't set text to an integer value. Let's come over to our update method here. Remember we created this associate method here to associate a class with this, so we're going to go ahead and need to actually call that within our class auto update here. So if we come to our update method, drop that down a few lines, we could say wautoupdate dot associate. Remember, associate requires a class of cAutoUpdate, and we can simply say me. So we're essentially just passing the associate method right here, an instance of ourselves. So we're just basically setting this updater here to whatever the current cAutoUpdate object was. And drop down one more line, and we can go ahead and say wautoupdate dot sd title dot text is equals to update name. And what this is doing is setting this bolded text here to whatever the name of our download was. And in this case, it would get set to RBtv episode 5 project files. Alright, so we've written quite a lot. And the one final step we're going to need to do is come back over here to our wmain window here, and our file check for updates menu item, and we're actually going to tell the program what to do whenever the user clicks the update. We're going to say dim updater as new cAutoUpdate class. So we're essentially creating a new object of cAutoUpdate, and we have to do that in order to initiate the download process. And we're going to say updater dot check version, and then if you remember, what check version requires is a current window as the window, and we're going to say wmain, and let's go ahead and save that. So whenever the user clicks this menu item here, check for updates, this is going to get called. A new instance of the cAutoUpdate class is going to get created. And in that new class, we're going to run check version with window main as our current window. Now you could change this to whatever you want. I'm just going to go ahead and set it as window main, assuming window main was you know, your program or your application that you were writing, or whatever window you wanted to have it. Let's go ahead and go to check version here. So now we come to the top, we create a new socket. We create the data that's going to be received by the socket. We create all these message dialogues, and then we call the version socket.get, which actually pulls our server for the data within index.html with our timeout, and we set it to this string here. Then we parse the version information to see if our app version here is less than or greater than the current version of the update available on the server. And if it is, if our program is less than the version available on the server, we parse all the data that's within that data file. We show our dialog allowing the user to either update now or cancel, and if they hit cancel, nothing happens, obviously. And we display all the data for them. Here's where we handle the button clicks for the message dialog. If the user presses update now, this action button gets called. Then it prompts the user with another modal dialog or another modal window within the current window, asking them where they want to save the download to with this save file name right here, current.zip. And then if the user does save it, we call this update function. If they don't save it, we just cancel and do nothing. So let's go ahead and dive into this update method here. We're passing the update method the current item, save item, which we set as here by the user, and our current window. So here we have the save item. We are associating, now we're going back to our WAutoUpdate window here. We're associating that to our current object, which is a CAutoUpdate class. We're setting the title, and this me.getUpdateURL actually downloads the file. This is going to be where we're downloading the file to the folder item that we passed in right here through the beginning of the method. And we are creating that as a zip file. And now by saying me.get, remember we're using all these functions here, these socket functions, and we have this receive progress, which updates our progress on this menu bar there. And we have the error, which does the error handling. So now one final thing we do need to remember, anytime we do create a socket, we need to remember to close out the socket once we're done with it, otherwise we're going to have a few memory leaks. So let's go ahead and come over here to check version. And here you can remember we use the version.get, which initially opens the socket. And so if we come here to the end of our statement, we can go to version socket.close, and that will close our socket and free up our memory. So the final step, let's go ahead and come over here to our WAutoUpdate, and let's go ahead and open up this cancel button here. And I'm sure you're familiar with how a button functions. Our action event here gets called whenever the user clicks this button. And we're just going to need to do a few things. So if the user clicks the cancel button while the download is occurring, we simply want to stop the download process and close this window, which is easy. You can do it in just a few lines of code here. I say updater, which is this CAutoUpdate socket there, dot close, and then we're going to say self, which is this WAutoUpdate window, dot close. And go ahead and save that. And that simply closes the window whenever the user hits the cancel button. So now let's go ahead and save this, and I'm going to go ahead and put in a file onto a server that I have pre-created. It's right here. I'm going to say it's about 1.5 MB, I believe. I'm just going to go ahead and drop it in there and upload that. Okay, 1.8 megs. So just for testing purposes, I'm putting up a large file. And let's go ahead and come back to Real Basic here, and let's test out our program. So let's go ahead and run this. So it compiled correctly, and if we come here to File and check for updates, you'll notice that this dialog slides down here. It contains all our available information. We have this available update, which is the title of the message dialog. We have this icon, which is just the icon 2, which in our case would reference the application icon. Here's our data that we pulled from the data file. And we have our cancel and our update button, which is the action button of the message dialog and the cancel button of the message dialog. So if I hit cancel here, it'll go ahead and slide up and no action will be taken. We can do this again, and if I hit the update now button, it brings down our save as dialog. So if I just name this as current, and if I hit save, you notice it brings up the size of the file and the current progress of the file. And as the file is being downloaded, it's automatically moving this progress bar. And you can see how our concatenation of the file size is getting rounded automatically. Let's go ahead and wait for this to download, and I'll show you one other thing that we're going to have to do before we're done. Alright, so we're almost there. So the file's completed, our bar is solid, but as soon as the file is done, what are we going to want to do? We're going to want to close this this dialog here and display the local file on their system. And that's going to be really simple to do. So we can just click this. Let's go ahead and quit our application here. And let's come to the download complete event. Now this event only gets called as soon as the download completes fully. No other occasion would get called. So if we simply type WAutoUpdate.close, and then we can reference a save item property, which is this right here, is that folder item that we saved to, .parent, which is going to reference the parent directory that it's located in. In our case, it's going to be the desktop folder. And then we can use the launch method. Now what the launch method will do for OS 10, it's going to open up the Finder to the parent directory, and in Windows it'll open up an Explorer window showing the parent directory. So let's go ahead and save this and run it again. And we're going to replace this. And let's wait again for this to download. So you see we did quite a bit of code, not too many methods, but all of it is very expandable. You can add features to it, remove features. You can bring it into any program pretty much, and it all should work with pretty much no modification to your program. Alright, so this is done, and now you see our window closed and our Finder opened up to display the current file, and so I can just double click that and do whatever I need to do to update. Now you can actually, if you have the user download a disk image, for example, and you wanted it to automatically open up, you could do that as well by simply instead of running parent.launch, you could run saveitem.launch, and if you had a zip file, you could also do that, where it would actually extract the directory or extract the file automatically. But in our case, I'm going to do parent.launch. Let's go ahead and save that. So if we come over here to our project window, let's go ahead and create a new folder. And we're just going to call it auto update. And let's drag these two into here. And so you can see that pretty much this is everything we need to update our program. There's a few things we added to window main, or that file check for updates here, and the adding it to the menu bar. But 3 or 4 lines of code to add to your program really isn't much. All you need to do is you can simply right click on this and hit make external, and that will actually export this as a separate object, as a class object that you can just simply import to your own program and instantly add an auto update functionality to it. And again, I'm going to leave these files on my directory on my server so that you guys can test out your own projects with it. I'm going to actually change this up so that it contains the project files for this episode, so you can go ahead and play around with that. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. I'm actually going to put up my Skype account so that you guys can Skype me if you need to ask questions. Please log into the forums, register on the site, realbasic.tv. Thank you so much for watching today's episode, and again, I apologize that it's been so long since I've actually recorded an episode, but hopefully we should be getting one out every week. So for RBtv, I'm your host, George Bonish. Stay tuned.